In this video, I'm going to demonstrate the Server Explorer SQL Server integration in Visual Studio.net. Now, I'm not exactly sure which versions of Visual Studio have this, so it's possible that you own a version of Visual Studio that does not have this integrated SQL Server integration in it. I try to look on Microsoft's website to get some idea of what features that the professional version, for example, had versus the Enterprise Architect, which is the version of Visual Studio I'm using, and really couldn't get any clear definitions. So it might turn out that you look for this feature and it's not there, or it's not as fully implemented. But this video should help you understand some of the things that you can do with the integration. First thing I did was pop open the window, the Server Explorer. And you'll note here that there's data connections. I'm going to go ahead and put a pin in here and hold this window open for us while we're talking about it. The first thing that you need to know is that you have the concept of data connections. And data connections are global to every project that you ever create within your instance of Visual Studio.net. So for example, I have local and my production copies of databases, mostly things that reside on my own laptop that I do development against. But in order to connect to one of the existing databases I have, all I need to do is just click the plus next to it, and like a tree view, it will open up, for example, the pubs database after it connects to it. So now I can work with the database diagrams, tables, views, and stored procedures. Before I get too far, however, what I'd like to do is right-click on the data connections, and I'd like to select Add Connection to create a new connection. And this brings up the Data Link Properties window. This is very, I think it's the same window that's used for UDLs that we used to use back in the COM and COM Plus days. So you can select the server name. If you have any servers within your environment, I don't. I just have my own local machine. So I'm just going to type in localhost, and then you can type in username, password, blank password, allow password saving, and then it'll show you all of the databases that reside on that server. I'm going to pick the forms off and test the connection, and I'm going to select OK. So now it'll refresh, and I'll be able to see that forms off database appear, and I can drill into that one as well. But I'm going to use, for the most part, the pubs database. The other thing that I can do is actually create a new database if I have a SQL Server or the MSDE installed. The MSDE comes with Visual Studio, or rather the .NET Framework, I believe, has the install in there. So I'm going to create a new SQL Server database, and again, I'm going to type in localhost, but I could type in the name of any server location, and I'm going to call this quick example. And the SQL Server authentication is just SA. It's going to ask me to verify this in just a moment. And we're going to click OK. And so now if we take a look, quick example is here. I can look at my properties window and see the connection strings and basically all the information about it on the right-hand side. But we can go ahead and start adding tables. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to, first of all, add a new table to our new database. And what I'm going to do is going to take off our pin so we can see in a more full view. And we're just going to create a customer database. So we're going to call this customer ID column, and we'll get to define other. If you've used SQL Server Enterprise Manager, this is almost exactly like that. You're going to see a lot of similarities. So customer name, customer address, and here I'll define the data type. And then I can also define whether it should be nulled or not, the length. We shouldn't have to touch that. I will change address to 200. So what I'm doing is just defining a table. I'm going to go here to the customer ID column. I'm going to make this an identity field. And then I'm also going to make this a primary key. Okay, I can set the relations between this and other tables by popping this up, but I'm not going to do that just yet because I don't have any other tables in my database. And then I can also manage constraints and so forth from here. The first thing I need to do is actually save this table, and I clicked on the Save button within Visual Studio, and the Choose Name dialog pops up. And type in here customer and select OK. And so I've successfully created my first table using the Visual Studio .NET tools. Now if we go back to let's close this up. To our tables, you can see I have customer. I can expand it out and see all the fields within customer. I select one of the fields. You can see the size of the fields. This is great for reference purposes. Of course, I can't change anything from here. To change things, I'm going to have to right-click on the table and select Design Table. Okay, and then I can get back in here and add another field or whatever I want to do. But what I probably want to do at this point is actually add some data. So I'm going to right-click on the customer table, and I'm going to select Retrieve Data from Table. Now you'll notice that this looks a lot like Microsoft Access or somewhere, or even Excel, where I can type in values. I'm going to type in the customer's name of Steve Jaworski. Let's go ahead and change that. Whoops, can't quite get it right here. And the customer address is 2828 New England. And I'm going to put my cursor in the next row. When I do that, notice that it automatically generated the customer ID of 1 because there's an identity column. So that's excellent. And I can go here and put Brian Faley and 2640 Sarah Avenue and so forth. Now what I can also do, let's close this off and then let's take a look at again. Retrieve data from table. I can see my values here. I can change the view to that of a diagram pane. So now I can see just those columns that interest me. Or more importantly, I'm going to turn off this view. Whoops. And do the SQL view so I can actually kind of create a subset where customer ID equals 2. And then I'll select my run query, and it'll just bring back Brian. To get back, all I'll need to do is just remove this and run it again, and it'll bring back all the values within our table. I can also check to make sure my SQL statement is good. And so here we'll select verify, and it'll say, yes, the SQL syntax has been verified against the data source. You're good to go, so then I can execute it again. Also from this SQL view, I can change the type from a select statement to insert results and values, and we'll talk about this at a future point in time, update, delete, and then actually make a table. So we can create all these different types of scripts for us right here from this pane. Now you got to be careful when you're working with the data directly. This is not a good idea, especially if it's a production system. If you're just doing some development, this tool is very valuable, but you have to be very careful that you don't delete or update records you didn't mean to delete using this tool. But at any rate, we're going to close it and say no, that we don't want to save changes to our customer table because we played around with it quite a bit. The next thing I want to do is create a orders table. So I'm going to just briefly, so I can show how to create relations, create an order ID, and we'll make this, again, integer. We'll make it an identity column, and then we'll also create a customer ID as the foreign key, and we're not going to allow a null there, and then a date time stamp, and we'll make this a date time. And we won't allow nulls. What we will do is place a default value of get date. So when a new record is entered, get date function will be fired off, and it'll actually take the time from the server and place it in that field, and we'll just type in amount as currency here. Money instead, I'm sorry. Okay. So let's save that as order table. Orders. And now let's add some data to that new table. And we'll leave the order ID alone, but we'll type in the customer ID of this. of 1, that would be Steve, and then we'll type in like $34. Notice when I did this that not only did it place the 1 because it's identity field, but also the date time stamp was generated as well. And we'll let Steve buy another product for $65, and then we'll do one from Bryant for $134. Okay. And we'll close this table out. Now what I'd like to do is go back to orders and go to the design table view, and then what I'd like to do is create relationships. So we see here that we have the property page, and we're going to create a new relationship between the customer and the orders table, customer ID, and the customer ID. So the customer ID's field from the customer table is the primary key. The foreign key is the customer ID field from the orders table. And there's different types of things that we can enforce here, like make sure that the data is there when it's created, enforce a relationship, or you can choose not to enforce the relationship by just unselecting this, or enforce a relationship or insert and delete. So you have some options there. Also, we're going to create an index, or we can look at the indexes that were created. We have 2. The first one was for orders, and the second one is for customers, but since we're not in that table when we popped this open, you can't see the customer's primary key. But we can make it multiple fields or columns rather, if we want to, so it can be indexed by order ID and date time stamp to make it unique. We'll talk about all the values within here in a future video. I just want to give you a nice overview of all the things that are available to you within SQL Server, and then you can also create any check constraints. Again, we'll talk about that at a future point in time. So we'll go ahead and save those changes that we made. It'll say, are you sure you want to do this because you have made changes to multiple tables? Yes, we're going to save those changes because the relationship affects both the customer table and the order table. The next thing that we're going to do is create a store procedure. To do that, we're going to go down and close up our tables and go to store procedures and select new store procedure. And it gives us a template for what the store procedure will look like. What we'll do is change this. We'll pass in customer ID as an integer, and we'll get rid of some of the comments in here and do select star from customer, where customer ID equals customer ID. And so what this does, it gives us a block of SQL that will be executed all at one point in time. We can even set a breakpoint here and step through it. Of course, we have to save this first, so let's do that. And then we can set a breakpoint, and it'll actually stop here. So we had multiple select statements, inserts, and updates within the course of this store procedure. We can make the changes here. We didn't rename it, so it kept its default name, store procedure 1. But now we can do some interesting things, like, for example, let's just right-click in here and select Run Store Procedure. What will happen is, since we have an input parameter defined as customer ID, that you see right here, that it's going to ask us what value do we want to put for that customer ID, and we can type in a value of 2 and select OK. And when we do, notice that in the output here below, it says, it gives us customer ID, customer name, so all the values of 2, Brian Faley, and the customer's address, and so on. One row returned. The return value was 0 because we didn't set it to anything. We could have done that if we wanted to, but we left it as default, and then it tells us that it finished running it successfully. Now what we can also do is just do a step into store procedure. And unfortunately, I don't think I have my SQL Server set up correctly to do this, but you'd be able to actually walk through each of the steps of the store procedure. Pretty neat. We'll talk about this stepping through and debugging stored procedures in a future video. I just wanted to give you an overview of what you can do here. So let's go ahead and close our stored procedures down. Next thing I want to do is create a view. It's a lot like a stored procedure, except it's kind of a combination of stored procedure and a table. So we're going to create a new view. It'll ask us what tables do we want to add to our view. We'll go ahead and select both customers and orders. We'll hit close, and we'll close this output. Now this gives us something that's very similar to the Query Builder. If you went through the SQL Data Adapter configuration video, you'll notice it looked a lot like this. So what we can do with this is visually, or using kind of a more table layout, or using the SQL code here, we can decide whatever approach that we want to take, but we can select customer name, customer address, and the amount, and those values be returned to us. We can also turn some of these views off. For example, say I don't want to see the diagram pane, I'll turn that off. And if I don't want to see the grid pane or the SQL pane, we'll just take those off as well. But we'll leave them on for right now. Then we can actually run the query that's been created for us and see what the results are. Notice that since we did an inner join between customer and orders, it returns Steve twice. That's fine. We can change that. We can even change and alias the names of the columns. We can do sorting and a lot of things without having to type in any code. Create criteria, several different columns for criteria, or if we're more. The last thing that I want to demonstrate is the use of database diagrams. Database diagrams allow you to make a printout for your office wall, or so that you can reference it during meetings, or even just save them right in their electronic form and reference them and see different views of your database structure. So in this case, I'm going to add all the tables from the pubs database to our database diagram by clicking Add, and notice then that it puts these on our database diagram design surface. And what I can do also is select specific tables and change the columns that show up. Right now we're only seeing one column, which is the actual field name, but suppose I wanted to select custom, for example. I could see not only the column name but also the type and whether it's nullable or not for that particular column. And we can select this one and just say, I don't want to see the actual column names. All I want to see is the name of the table only, just to know that it's related to it. And maybe we'll feature the stores table in another database diagram since it's so large of a table. I can also add text to this to give some meaning. So I'm going to type in, this is a diagram of our applications tables. Okay, something pretty nonsensical in this case, but it allows you to draw and do things on this for reference purposes. The other thing that I want to do is view the page breaks, because we may have so many tables within our database diagram that they may not all fit on one sheet of paper, and we may have to paste them together. And in this case, they all do, but I'm going to move one of the tables over here by dragging and dropping it, and now this diagram takes up at least 2 pages, and it might maybe even more depending on how far it goes down. So you can see, yeah, it goes down another set. If I use this little navigation tool here, I can actually scroll through and find things within our database diagram. And I'm free to move things around as much as I want to and navigate through them that way. I can also select to recalculate the page breaks in case I've modified things so much that I think that there might be a more optimal way to position the tables to make sure that they fit on as few sheets of paper as possible. Now you have the flexibility here to do actual creation of tables as well, and setting of their properties. So for example, I can select this icon here and it says new table. I can type in the new name of the table, and we'll call this error report table. And notice that I can then go in and set the column name, the data type, the length, whether to allow nulls or not. And it becomes part of the database diagram, but it also becomes part of our database. And I can even like select one of the rows. Let's say here, well, let's have column. Let's call this error ID. Make this into an integer, and we're not going to allow nulls. Error description. And what I can do is select error ID and then make it a primary key. So there's lots of things that we can do here by actually adding tables and views to our database diagram. But in this case, what I want to do is just remove it, so I'm going to select the delete table from the database. Now I can also remove a table from a diagram but not delete it from the database. So I'll do that to jobs by right-clicking on it and select remove table from diagram. It won't delete it permanently. So you got to be careful with this functionality. Don't get the happy trigger finger and delete tables accidentally. That's why some of this is a little bit dangerous. It should only be used during development time, not on your production databases, or else you might experience some problems, I guess you could say. I can also insert and delete columns here. Again, that's good and dangerous all at the same time. I can manage relationships, manage the constraints and the indexes from the appropriate property boxes by selecting the relationship, right-clicking, and going to the property pages. Here I can see columns, relationships, index keys, check constraints, just like I can from using the table designer. And so you can see that there's a lot of possibilities for this. I can now print out my diagram, see the pages are numbered, and let's zoom it out so we can see exactly what we would have by selecting the two fit. So this is what it would look like once it was printed out on 4 separate sheets of paper. So this was just a drop in the bucket. I wanted to quickly overview all of the features of the SQL Server integration into the Server Explorer. And we're going to have to go back into each one of these and talk about them at length. But this should give you some good overall understanding of what you can do. And this is an important tool that's integrated because it was a pain in the past to switch between the SQL Server Enterprise Manager, the Query Analyzer, and Visual Studio, like for Visual Basic 6.0 or for InterDev or even C++. And now it's just integrated right into the same tool, and it makes life a lot easier to have all of this in one spot. So I hope you enjoyed this video and that you'll actually take advantage of these features in your software development.